How's it going? I'm IlaGolden and welcome to my blog. Che ati on vendres es etimero zonero, mi nonzie IlaGolden, hitch is to Sorry, I couldn't resist. I know you guys have no idea about Etean, and the first thing I do is start off with a little bit of Etean. I thought, you guys might want to hear a little bit what it sounds like. I may or may not tell you what that translates into. You might be able to work it out for yourself. Who knows? So anyway, I want to sort of start with a little bit of history of, how Etean came into being. You might find it an interesting story, you might not find it an interesting story, but I think it's important so that you know where this has come from and where this sort of started and why it is even a thing to begin with. So when I first started writing fantasy type stories, I would occasionally put in these sort of made up words and sentences just to sort of create this idea of a different culture. And certainly when I first started writing the fanfic saga, it appeared a few times in there, and then I sort of hit university. So I originally started writing the first book in the fanfic saga just before I hit university, and then when in university I sort of decided that it would be more fun if these words actually meant something, if they actually had a meaning to them. So I started to translate, and I started to formulate it as a sentence, as a language. One of the things I sort of did to sort of help me with that is my first year in university I had this massive pinboard wall. So I sort of, alphabetized all the words that I had, printed them out on sheets of paper, and then would handwrite new words in as and when I sort of came up with them. And then once I reached a certain number of extra words, would write them in and then reprint the lists, and and so on and so on and so forth, until the list became actually fairly quite extensive. As it stands now, I don't now print out because I've got like 14 pages, so it's definitely a basic language still at this point. Functional, but basic. There's still a lot of words that I'm missing, a lot of words that I still haven't thought about, and I really sort of need to formulate and work out how I'm going to sort of fit them in. But how often, how frequently I come up with new Etean words has sort of slowed down over the years, and some of that has to do with not having the opportunity to use it as much as I would like in my work, because I'm not focusing on the right situation to be coming up with new words. And some of it is, a lot of the time, the things that I want to be able to say, I've actually got most of the words there already, and I might only need to add the one word, or very rarely the two words. So it doesn't sort of make sense to sort of keep coming up with words when at this point in time I don't need to be coming up with words. I mean, I hope eventually to have a fully functional, huge language with it, but at the moment it's sort of, you could call it being in its teenage phase. It's not in its childhood phase anymore, it's sort of in its teenage phase. So there are three sort of main variants of Etean, which are sort of more like regional dialects of Etean, which is Select, Gonet, and Odet. And there, within my Etean dictionary, you've got a few words which are exclusive to certain of those regional dialects. But again, I don't sort of use that too often. It's so much work as it is. I'm not making things more complicated for myself. The other thing about Etean is that the way the language is used, certain words can mean more than one thing, and it's how it's used in the sentence and how it's contextualized within the sentence that puts the emphasis on which word it actually means. And the words are usually things that mean something fairly similar and could be fairly interchangeable, although not necessarily meaning the exact same thing. And the reason I sort of did that was certainly in the very early days, when I wasn't, at that point thinking, oh, I want this to be a whole big massive language. It made it easier to not have to come up with half a dozen new words for something that means sort of the same to a word that I already had. You can call that laziness, or you can call that an actual rationalised idea of cutting down the amount of work that I might need to do. I mean, as I said, when I first started doing it, it wasn't, with the idea of it becoming this massive thing that it sort of ended up being, or this ongoing project that I've sort of got in the background, rolling on most of the time. Yeah. So the other thing I should mention with Etean is that alongside creating Etean itself, I also came up with its written counterpart. Don't know how well you guys are going to be able to see this. This is one of a number of handwritten copies I have of the written language that goes alongside with Etean, which is called Ode, O-D-E. And this is an example of it sort of, written out. This is not an alphabet, this is just something at some point that I wrote in Ode. I have no idea if it is English into Ode or Etean into Ode. I just know that it's something I wrote at some point, back when my handwriting was almost neat. Nowhere near that neat anymore. And in case you thought I was joking about having it several copies, like, written everywhere, it is something that I do quite enjoy, going through and even numbers. So it's something that I have a lot of enthusiasm for, and I have books, my old diaries, for example, backs of them are just covered in Ode writing. I had quite a lot of fun, and they are all English translated into Ode, because at that point in time Etean didn't really exist in even the form that it's in now, so it made more sense to just translate English into Ode and have a lot of fun learning how to write the language that way, and making certain decisions with it that way. And again, it's with the written side of it, it's not something that you can necessarily get into a book. You can describe, and I've done my best at various times to sort of describe some of the symbols, but it's not easy. It's really not easy to sort of get across the written side. But the fact that I know that there is a written side to it, and I know how that written side works, and I know how that written side looks, helps me in my head formulate how my world looks, which then helps me describe my world a lot better. So there's definitely been a lot of point to the creation of Ode alongside Etean, and separately to Etean at the same time. Etean, in terms of how it sounds, I did give you a brief demonstration just now. A lot of the time the words that I create have sort of a rhythmic feel to them, partly because when I was sort of like filling in words in sentences that I wanted to create, I would fill it in with a word that sounded right alongside the other words, so the sentences will quite often end up with this sort of rhythm to them. Doesn't necessarily mean that it works 100% of the time with everything, because unfortunately it can't. As much as possible, I've ended up with this very rhythmic sounding language, which I quite like, and a lot of the words, especially like the longer words, have this nice sort of jaunt to them. I don't know how better to sort of put that. And I said that was a conscious choice, that was a deliberate choice on my part, because I like the idea of it being a rhythmic language. I like the idea of the idea that it's a language that lends itself to being melodic quite easily. Partly because I'm somebody who loves music anyway. So the idea of this language where the people in it could just as easily be singing as they are speaking just made a lot of sense to me. The idea that the language itself should have its own natural rhythm to it and its own natural sound to it became important to me as I, developed the language more. And even short phrases like "Kista kesta," which means "why now," or "Miti sono sa," which means "what's going on." You can hear that sort of like that little bit of a bounce in how it sounds and how it sort of phrases. And as I said, that was important to me, and because to me, yes, it's written down, and somebody who's reading it might not necessarily think that these words sound the way they do in their head as they sound, when I'm saying them. But I wanted to sort of know in my own head that this is how it sounded and this is the rhythm that there is to it. And certain letters have more words than other letters, just because that's the way it ended up. That's how it ended up. You've also got words which mean completely different things and sound very similar. Like, in English you've got two and two. In Etean you've got sen, and sen. And they're all spelled differently. So you've got CEN, which I believe, which means speak. You've got sen, SEN, which means otherworldly. And you've got sen, CEEN, which is five, I believe. And again, that's you can't sort of come up with a language without taking some inspiration from the language that you actually speak yourself. So you've got to, CENN is five. So you've got to sort of take on board that's going to influence your main primary language, is going to influence the language that you're coming up with. But also being exposed to other languages either through school or through subtitled films and animes and cartoons and stuff as an adult has also had an impact on language. There are lots of words which sound very similar to other things and to other words in other languages. But then I think the idea behind Etean itself is that within the multiverse, Etean is the original language. Etean is the origin of language. So, not to sort of cover up the fact that, I'm going to be influenced by real words in the real world, that sort of is a nice explanation as to why some words sound very similar and mean very similar things to words and language that we've got now, in whatever language it is. It makes a lot of sense because this is the first language, therefore all languages are going to sort of derive from it. So that was something that was very important. And I know this video is a little bit back and forth and all over the place. I keep remembering things that I want to talk about. It's great. So I know this is only a short one today, but as you can see, it's long enough to justify having a video on its own, I believe. And the reason I sort of am keeping it as brief as it is because although I could, bombard you with lots of phrases and words and stuff that are Etean, I think because I know when I'm talking about various story concepts and story ideas in later videos, obviously I'm going to say, well, that's the Etean word for this, or, in Etean it's this, and whatever. I feel like you're going to get more than enough of me speaking in Etean. So just having like a nice introduction, a nice idea of what Etean is and sort of what it sounds like, and sort of where I'm coming at from with it. And you know, I might sort of tell you every now and then, oh, I've just, you know, come up with this whole new Etean word, and this is what it means, and this is why I've come up with it, and this is the sentence it goes in. I think there are going to be plenty of moments like that, similar to that, or, you know, of that vein in future vlogs. So to sort of bombard you with too much of it now might be a bit of an overload, when all you really need is sort of an explanation as to what it is. And as I mentioned in the last video, I do love Etean. I do love talking about Etean. I could talk about Etean for hours. And I've got my Etean to English dictionary like open right here, and I'm like, I just wanna say random words from this dictionary and go from there. But you know, you've got to be a bit more concise. I want to be a bit more concise, and I don't want to be overloading you guys with like so much, because I've got so much else to talk about in you know, future episodes, and I will be coming back to Etean again and again and again anyway, just because Etean words do quite often get used, even if they're not, you know, being spoken in fluid sentences. You know, certain Etean words pop up everywhere just because that's what I do. Alright, with that being said, the next vlog is going to be a bit of a weird one. It's going to be dreams and nightmares and how they've influenced my work. And I know that sounds weird, but there have been certain dreams and nightmares and things I've had, certainly in my younger life, definitely in my teens, which have had a huge impact on how the multiverse has formed the way that it has. I know it's a bit of a weird sort of subject to talk about, but there is definitely a couple of very specific ones which it's interesting to see what they germinated, for want of a better word, and the impact they've sort of had on the direction of my work. So might be something that interests people, might not be something that interests people. It could be really popular, it could be really, you know, but I'm just starting out. None of my videos are popular yet. Might as well throw everything at the wall, right? So yeah, next one will be Dreams and Nightmares. I hope to see you then, and until then, see ya!